And Flea turned to me and said, Keith, you're going to have to sing with us tonight. And that's when the ladies showed up with the gram of Coke. And that was all it took.
The last interview that I did here, I walked outside, there was a syringe on the street laying in the gutter, and I took a picture of it and posted it on my Instagram. My wife made me take it off Instagram. She should have just opened my sock drawer.
Well, I'm living behind the Vista Theater. The first week that I was there, they tossed a couple of dead bodies over the little fence at the end of the street. It was pretty badass. And the deal actually went bad over here in this part of town.
Anyway, I'm your host, John Seidel, and I'm here with my guest, Keith Morris. Keith, you grew up in Hermosa in the 70s. What was it like?
A lot of sand, a lot of surf, during the summertime, a lot of girls in bikinis. If we weren't surfing, we were skating. If we weren't skating, we were body surfing. If it was too cold, everybody would go up into the mountains and the ski. So we came from that kind of just go for it attitude, which would lead into like what we were doing in Black Flag.
And your dad, right?
Well, my dad was one of the reasons why I took the detour. I didn't follow in his footsteps. I didn't want to be groomed as the bait prince or the bait king of the South Bay. Like, come see Keith for your frozen anchovies. I didn't buy that on any level.
So your dad did own the bait and tackle shop for the Hermosa Pier.
Later on, he opened what they considered the largest fishing tackle store on the West Coast.
Someone told me that the doors were rehearsed next to one of your dad's shops, or is that?
Well, no. That story is further north into Manhattan Beach, where one of the Doors' parents actually lived in that neighborhood. And I was playing with some friends on I guess it was like a Sunday. We were hanging out in their garage, and all of a sudden we started hearing this noise, and there was a hole in the garage where somebody had apparently got mad or got drunk and kicked a hole in the wall. And we heard this music, so I poked my head through the hole, and I looked up, and there's the Lizard King and Densmore and Mr. Manzarek just jamming away.
That's amazing. The Doors were the music that I turned on to before I could remember. My mother told me.
Well, you're also UCLA, which makes perfect sense. There's a thread there with Jim Morrison going to film school at UCLA.
There is a thread, but for me it was a coincidence because my mother told me that I came home from arts and crafts.
Well, I would blame my love of music on my mother too, because we would get in the car, and the first thing that my sister or I would do while we were standing in the front seat would turn on the radio, and we had AM radio, we had KHJ, and we had KRLA. You would hear the Seeds on KRLA, and you would hear the Monkees on KHJ. You would hear Motown on KHJ, and you would hear Stax on KRLA.
Do you remember buying your first album? Do you remember that?
Oh, vividly. My friend, Chuck Underwood, found a $50 bill that his dad had stashed in the fruit bowl on the counter of their apartment. So he grabbed the $50 bill and he said, Keith, we need to buy a bunch of stuff. We need to go to Sears. And my grandmother drove from Inglewood to Hermosa Beach and then drove us over to Torrance to the Sears. We walked in the front door. The first thing that greeted us was a big stand it was filled with Sgt. Pepper's, Beatles Sgt. Pepper's. So we're talking, 1967. And the first thing Chuck does is he grabs 2 copies. He said, Keith, this one's for you. This was at a time when the record was like $2.98. Remember, he's got a $50 bill that he's got to piss through. Needless to say, when we got home, the situation with Chuck was that he could barely walk for like 2 weeks when his dad found out that the $50 bill was missing from the fruit bowl. And I had a stereo copy of Sgt. Pepper's, which is the first album that I ever owned. And what an introduction to music. I've got a few copies of Sgt. Pepper's. I do not have my original copy because I played it so much it was just useless. It looked like it had been used to chop the cocaine at the party.
When did you start from that point in time, going to the store, getting your own music, and then going to concerts?
I'd seen the Beatles and the Rolling Stones on Ed Sullivan and was jazzed about that. My youngest aunt was a go-go dancer. She'd dance at the Hollywood Palladium, the teen night at the Hollywood Palladium featuring the Rolling Stones. And there would be the hot rods parked inside of the Palladium and the girls doing go-go dancing while the Rolling Stones would be up there. Of course, at that time, all these bands, they never had to play like 2-hour sets. They all played like their 5 biggest hits. And it's like, hello, I can't get no satisfaction under my thumb. And then they're out of there. So it was kind of like these reviews where, I attribute to a lot of these bands being able to have the longevity that they've had because they would be part of these reviews where it would be the Rolling Stones and the Animals and Chuck Berry and James Brown and kind of like the Tammy show at the Santa Monica Civic. Just get up, do your thing, get everybody freaked out, hard and wet, and see ya. The Circle Jerks played at a place called Mississippi Nights on the Mississippi River in St. Louis. And that was one of Chuck Berry's favorite places to go. On the particular night that we played, he showed up to the show and saw all of the punk kids just going apeshit. Like 800 kids just going nuts. And he saw this and was like, I've got to be a part of this. So when he came to the front of the stage and asked our roadie if he could join us for a song.
Get out of here.
We had stopped the song that we were playing, and our roadie came to us and said, that's Chuck Berry right there. He wants to play a song with you guys. You don't say no to Chuck Berry. No. So Hetson says, just follow along. Just play and see. When he gets to the chorus, you'll know what the song is. So, of course, he busts out with Roll Over Beethoven. And I'm in such awe. I'm like, what do I sing here? I'd only sang the song a zillion times, and the lyrics just, for some reason, weren't there for me. But then when he got to the chorus, it was like, of course, roll over Beethoven, tell Tchaikovsky the news. Greg Hetson is a major fan of Angus Young from AC/DC. Angus Young does his version of the duck walk when he's doing the dance across the stage. If there was no Chuck Berry, there would be no Keith Richards. If there was no Keith Richards, there would be no Johnny Thunders. There would be no Steve Jones of the Sex Pistols. There would be no, like the guys in Mott the Hoople who influenced Mick Jones of the Clash. If you're a guitar player and you're sitting at home and you're just strumming around and you're fingering around, you're going to play something that this guy played a while back. So after we get through playing, after the end of the show, the owner of the Mississippi Nights comes up to me and he said, when Chuck Berry left, after you guys got through playing, he said that you were one of the greatest rock and roll bands he has ever seen. You're not going to get a higher compliment than that.
I agree, man. Well, speaking of what you were saying, Chuck Berry to Keith Richards, the Thunders, Steve Jones, let's move to punk rock. When did you learn about punk rock? What was the first you heard of punk rock? How'd you get into it?
I didn't really get into it because there was a period in time here in Southern California where the hardest thing you were going to hear if you turned on the radio was going to be Fleetwood Mac singing about, getting cocaine blown up their ass, and or you played whoever was number one on the radio. So consequently, there was this void of any artistic creativity. And for me, I would cite this as a perfect example. I would walk into Music Plus on Pacific Coast Highway, ready to purchase a couple of records. And I would avoid whatever was being displayed in the display bins, because it was all, maybe there might be Aerosmith, Get Your Wings. This was the hardest stuff, and that's the kind of stuff that I listened to. When I didn't go to Music Plus, I worked in a record store, and the guy was all about Laurel Canyon. Be mellow.
Taking it easy.
Taking it very easy.
Is that when you met Ginn? Or was it Dale Nixon?
Dale Nixon would not make an appearance until later on. I actually had a run-in with Dale Nixon, and it wasn't a cool situation. But that's much further into the story. I met Ginn at Rubicon Records on Pier Avenue. Greg's younger sister, Erica, who is just like, you would want to see her in a bikini during the summertime, and you'd lose it. She was dating the guy that owned the record store. So he would split with her. They would go, do what lovers do. And when he split, that's when the music in the record store did a complete turnaround. So Ginn would accompany his sister. She'd bring him along with her. And then she'd take off with Michael. And here's Ginn, and I'm looking at him like, dude, what's happening? We're just rapping like a couple of goofs. And I'm playing Ted Nugent, Stranglehold. I'm playing Toys in the Attic by Aerosmith, because that was the hardest stuff in the record store. The hardest thing that you would find would be like a Patti Smith single at the Music Plus. And then occasionally the Sex Pistols snuck in there. Anarchy in the UK, their first single. Then there was The Damned, Neat, Neat, Neat. Stuff like that would trickle into the big record store.
Okay, so one moment you were at this record store listening to Seals and Crofts and America, and then a couple of punk albums come in. And then, so how'd the next progression go to Black Flag?
Greg Ginn was a deadhead, which you would scratch your head going, what's up with that? We, along with Michael, decided to go see Thin Lizzy play with Journey at the Santa Monica Civic. When I say Journey, I don't mean the falsetto, castrato.
The Ainsley Dunbar.
The Ainsley Dunbar was still playing drums.
They're pretty good.
The first two Journey records. They're very listenable. There is a bit of an edge.
I can't really see the connection to Black Flag, but continue.
Well, we wanted to go check out The Boys Are Back in Town and Jailbreak. That's the reason why we went. Of course, we stayed to see Journey because we paid $5.50 to see the concert. And it was at some point, somebody in one of the bands struck a note. I looked at Greg and he looked at me. And that's probably when the light flipped on above our heads. We should get in a room and just thrash about and see what happens. Greg, on the way back, said, well, I got a handful of songs, and I'm very intrigued. Like, wow, I would really like to hear what this Mr. Mellow guy, this Mr. Nerd, he looked like he could have, at that time, if there would have had the wave of computers, he would have been a computer specialist. So I'm really excited about the fact that we're just going to meet in his living room. We didn't have a bunch of equipment. He had a guitar. He had an amp. I had somehow managed to get a microphone and a cord, and he plugged into his guitar amp, and I plugged into his guitar amp. So all of the stuff that we were doing, all of the noise was just coming out of whatever speakers he had there in his guitar rig. And when he started playing, I was really floored. I mean, I was taken aback. I was like, wow, he was fucking going at it.
So he played like the way we know his sound from the moment he started playing?
Yes, that's what really blew me away.
Do you remember the first thing you screamed into the mic?
I don't remember the first lyrics. I wrote lyrics to song number 4, song number 5, Wasted, which was really, at that time, totally appropriate because I lived on the Strand and all of the people that I hung out with were just a bunch of losers, the guys that would be passed out under the pier by noon because they'd consumed so much beer, or where's the party on Friday night?
Greg's brother was Raymond Pettibone. When did he do the logo, the art?
Well, he was the first bass player.
Oh, okay.
And he wasn't really a bass player, and we want to call him one of the band members, and he will deny that. If you were to go up to him and say, so what was it like being the first bass player in Black Flag? Well, we weren't Black Flag. We were Panic. For the first 2.5 years, we were Panic. And then there was a French band called Panic, and Rodney played their single, and it was like, we're not going to get into any legalities. We got to change the name. Then Raymond showed up, and he had the 4 bars and the name, Black Flag. Ginn wanted to call the band Rope. Like, hang yourself, go hang yourself. And everybody in the band was like, no. Maybe that was his first attempt at being the dictator. I don't know. But it was 3 against 1. And then Raymond's there, and he plops down the piece of paper with the 4 waving black bars and the name Black Flag. And it was a no-brainer. Like, we all looked at each other, and it was something out of a movie where it just clicked. There we go. That's it. That's us.
Did you move into the church? Is that what
I lived in the church for about 6-7 months.
I'm interested in your coming of age into the punk scene in Hollywood, and if that ever happened and how that happened. Did it ever happen, or was it something that you assumed because of decline of the Western civilization, seeing it on the film?
Well, you have to understand that all of the punker-dunkers up in Hollywood were all like fashionistas. They were getting their fashion tip from what was going on in the UK. We had nothing to do with that because we all looked like a bunch of scraggly hoe dads, guys that you would see sitting in the front row at the Peter Frampton concert. We looked like we would have been following the Grateful Dead from show to show. So consequently, we were getting the cold shoulder from everybody up in Hollywood. And I remember the night that it turned around was at a party up on Fountain. Somebody had played at the Whiskey or at the Starwood, and somebody was manning the turntable. And there was a break in the action, and one of us placed the first side of the Nervous Breakdown EP, and everybody in that room took a couple of steps back. Like, is that really you? You guys aren't supposed to be playing music like that. It was that moment that Brendan Mullen finally realized, after Greg Ginn and I cornering him every opportunity we could get whenever we were at the Mask, bugging him, telling him, pleading with him to let us play at the Mask. That's where we wanted to play. We wanted to be a part of the scene. That wasn't happening because of the way that we looked. We were flying flannel. We were wearing sweatshirts. We were wearing Vans and cords and used Levi's, and we didn't look like the limey looking people in Hollywood.
So did you get a gig? Did Brendan give you the gig?
Brendan eventually told me that out of all of the bands that he had dealt with, all of the bands that he'd seen and heard that were part of the LA punk scene, that Black Flag was his favorite band. We got to play the last night of the original Mask. We were the opening band. The fire department showed up with the fire marshal and the LAPD and said, no more. You're out of here. We can't have this.
Did you have a moment where you felt like you had arrived on the scene, that you were one of the scene? I know I had that moment at one point in Hollywood. Was it
my moment? I was baptized by Durf from Fear. I had this thing where I could fit a 6-pack of Tall Boys in the front of my pants. And we were standing in the alley there on Cherokee that led to the steps down into the Mask. And we love Fear. I mean, so I wanted to have a beer with Durf. So I pulled out one of these beers and I handed it to him. And he looked at me and he opened the top of the can and dumped the entire beer on me. And there was nothing that I was going to be able to do because Lee Ving was standing next to him. And we know that Lee looks like the guy that you don't want to get into any kind of an altercation with. So I stood there and I took it and it was like, okay. Then I busted out the cocaine. And that's when Durf and I became like bros.
Yeah, those Fear guys, they did like their blow, didn't they? So, Decline, you know, when that came out, by that time you had left Black Flag. Did that really change your life?
What the documentary did for us was it acted like a demo tape or a business card. It's like, here we are. This is what we do. This is what our scene is about. So now all of a sudden, people in all of these major cities are seeing this film, you know, on Saturday night at midnight. Like, wow, that's what they do in Los Angeles? I want to be like that too. I like that. Now all of a sudden, we don't have to get in the van to drive to a lot of places. Our first major road trip was a flight to New York to play like 5 cities on the East Coast.
You guys were one of the first bands to really tour on the
Black Flag was getting in the van. They were going out and playing anywhere that would allow them to play. What it did was it lit a fire under some of our asses.
By this time you had recorded Group Sex. When did you write these songs?
The situation with that album was it was done on a pot deal, and we recorded at the voiceover studio on the Desilu parking lot. It wasn't a place you would go to record music. Lucy and Desi would go in there to overdub or do voiceover or what have you. And they would give us a call like at 3:30 in the afternoon and tell us, oh, we have 45 minutes. We have an hour starting at 7. Can you be here? And we'd throw all of the equipment in the back of Greg's truck and drive to Culver City.
And how did you meet Greg Hetson?
Greg was a member of the Tourists. The Tourist turned into Red Cross. We actually played a living room party with them. Greg was one of the guitar players, occasional bass player, and we all just became friends.
Tell us about your songwriting process, how you write a song.
I'm not a songwriter because I play no instruments. I can play drums a little bit. If I come up with some kind of a riff in my head, I got to find a guitar player to tell him that it goes.
So hold on. Can you draw for an example of an early Circle Jerk song that you wrote the guitar part like that?
Not really. And the reason being is I don't sit around listening to Circle Jerks records.
I realized one afternoon or in one conversation that you actually wrote guitar parts by humming them in the way that you did before. And that amazed me.
Down, 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 down. Thinking Pete Townsend, that's where that came from. When the shit hits the fan, we all got a duck. 5-pound blocks of cheese, bags of groceries. I'd written lyrics in Black Flag, and when you write lyrics, that means you've written half of the song. So now all of a sudden, we have these bits and pieces from these songs that are very recognizable. I mean, at that time, I didn't recognize a lot of this stuff because I'm blazing. I'm like blacked out, whited out, speeding, drunk, and not paying attention to a lot of this stuff, just going with it. Consequently, we have Red Cross riffs. We have reworked Black Flag riffs. We're placed in this situation where we're reaching and grabbing and swiping and stealing. That's what we were accused of. It's all been played before. Getting back to the Pete Townsend windmill, he's playing Chuck Berry riffs here and there, Jeffrey Lee Pierce offers up It's a Small World After All, his reworking of It's a Small World After All, which we turned into Group Sax. We didn't know it was a Walt Disney song. We just did it.
Was there an element of humor in the process of writing those early albums? Was it
always sarcasm, because there are all of these bands that are running around that are like serious. And we had our serious moments, but I think our saving grace was the fact that we just wanted to party.
Is that why eventually you guys signed to a major label? Then you signed to Big Al Peters at Mercury Records?
Dude, that was much later, though. That was during the Green Day sweepstakes, where all of the punk rock bands that had been around for any length of time were all getting offered record deals. You know, we can blame Green Day for that, because Green Day, what did they sell? 90 zillion records?
Yeah, I saw that.
And it was a disaster.
Moving into Off, you still carry a punk rock ethos. I know that people assume that you do because you're Keith Morris, but do you really, or is it more sarcasm and humor, or is it just still the same?
It's a mix. I'm influenced by life, like things that are going on, like something that I read or something that I see. Dimitri and I actually came up with a song called Fuck People, based on standing on the corner. We were going to Vaughn's to get some Starbucks coffee. No plug for Starbucks, screw them. And the guy comes just racing up to the red light. There's a car in front of him, and he's just like banging on his horn like, well, what's up with this? You're not going anywhere. It's a red light. Fuck you, man. I hate people. Fuck people. And Dimitri looked at me and he said, those are lyrics for a song.
So you're taking a break from Off and you're...
Well, yeah, a 1-year hiatus. The thing with Flag is we're all the guys that wouldn't play with Greg Ginn for all of our various reasons.
And what do you guys talk about in the van?
It's all like health stuff, like... Billy talks about like bands that he works with, bands that he produces, you know, all sorts of fun things that elderly adults would talk about.
I've always seen you as a rock concert t-shirt guy. What are the 3 t-shirts you're wearing right now in rotation?
I'm wearing a thrash band, Charles Bronson. I have no Deer Hunter outfit that I would wear.
But you have a Chili Peppers t-shirt you wear, I'm sure.
I don't have a Chili Peppers t-shirt.
Is it the baseball hat?
Or a baseball hat.
Weren't you in the Chili Peppers?
I was in the Chili Peppers for a night at the Olympic Auditorium.
Really?
Because Anthony had got arrested for jaywalking. And everybody was standing around going, where's Anthony? Where's Anthony? Where's Anthony? Thinking like if they chanted that enough, he would just magically appear.
So was it fun singing Under the Rainbow or what's
I knew none of their lyrics. And Flea turned to me and said, Keith, you're going to have to sing with us tonight. And that's when the ladies showed up with the gram of Coke. And that was all it took.
I thought you were going to say the ladies showed up with the roses, like the old ladies from the Olympic neighborhood showed up with the roses. And
every rose has a thorn.
I want to make sure
those roses that they brought to the Olympic that night.
Before we're about to wrap up here, and before we do, I want to just clarify the rotation of rock t-shirts. We got Charles Bronson. We got a Deer Hunter shirt or no?
No Deer Hunter, but I got a couple of Germs t-shirts.
Didn't Darby like actually save your life?
Darby prevented me from leaping out of a station wagon on the Santa Monica Freeway on a 4th of July when he grabbed me by the belt loop on the back of my Levi's and pulled me back into the car. I'd actually opened the door and was getting ready to donate all of my parts to the Santa Monica Freeway.
It's been great hanging after hours with you, Keith.
After hours.
We've got more cool guests coming up here at the Burgundy Room in Hollywood, so be sure to subscribe, get every episode. And I want to thank our guests again, Keith Morty Morris. Till the next time, this is John Seidel. See you.